Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. The Department of Justice is doubling down on voting policy by doubling voter enforcement staff. They say it's to combat voter restrictions. Senator Tom Cotton says several hundred military whistleblowers have reported what was called anti-American indoctrination training. He also noted reports of plummeting morale. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin now faces questions. As the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border worsens, Texas finds a way that could help fix the situation. This as Texas and Arizona ask other states for help. A mom who lived under Chairman Mao's communist regime in China is sounding the alarm. As she speaks out against critical race theory, she says the similarities between what's happening in America and the Cultural Revolution are terrifying. The FDA is set to release J&J vaccines from a troubled Baltimore plant. The EU's drug regulator says they recommend against their release in Europe. Senator Tom Cotton says hundreds of military whistleblowers have reported being forced to receive, quote, anti-American indoctrination training, including critical race theory. During a hearing Thursday, Cotton probed Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin over the reports. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
Following claims that Marxist and woke ideology is infiltrating the military, Senator Tom Cotton and Representative Dan Crenshaw set up a reporting site for military whistleblowers.
Mr. Secretary.
On Thursday, Cotton told Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin they've received several hundred whistleblower complaints about what he called Pentagon extremist and diversity training.
One Marine told us that a military history training session was replaced with mandatory training on police brutality, white privilege, and systemic racism. He reported that several officers are now leaving his unit, citing that training. Soldiers have come forward to tell us they are being forced to watch videos about systemic racism and documentaries that rewrite America's history as a fundamentally racist and evil nation.
One service member reportedly said their unit was required to read White Fragility, a book that claims, quote, white people raised in Western society are conditioned into a white supremacist worldview because it is the bedrock of our society and its institutions. Cotton read out numerous other examples and said that a number of service members are reportedly leaving because of the training.
Mr. Secretary, we're hearing reports of plummeting morale, growing mistrust between the races and sexes where none existed just 6 months ago, and unexpected retirements and separations based on these trainings alone. And again, these are not my words, these are the words of your own troops.
In April, Austin ordered new steps to address extremism in the ranks of the military. The move raised concerns about how extremism would be defined and determined. Cotton probed Austin with a series of yes or no questions about his own beliefs surrounding racism and the military. Austin said he doesn't believe the military is fundamentally racist or that people should be treated differently based on their sex or skin color, adding that that's why the military has a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I would also say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to this military now, and it will be important in the future. And so we're going to make sure that our military looks like America and that our leadership looks like what's in the ranks of the military.
Cotton noted that for decades, the military has been one of the institutions in society where you're most likely to get ahead based on merit, regardless of skin color, where you're from, or who your parents are. Austin was in agreement, saying he's an example of that.
There's a push to use gender-neutral language in the U.S. They, them, zer. But how do people feel about the government using birthing people to describe mothers? NTD's Miguel Moreno has more from a senator who noticed this particular change in President Biden's budget request.
President Biden is asking Congress for about $1.5 trillion in discretionary funding. A request was submitted as usual.
I was a little taken back when I just read it and saw it.
But a change in language caught the eye of Senator James Lankford during a Senate hearing. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra had trouble defining the replacement for mothers.
You shifted from using the term mother to birthing people rather than mother. Can you help me get a good definition of birthing people?
Well, I'll check on the language there, but I think if we're talking about those who give birth, I think we're talking about, I don't know how else to explain it to you.
Becerra later said they want to be precise in their language, which the senator disagreed with, saying mother is also good and precise. Birthing people is gender-neutral language with variations.
Health equity for Black birthing people is attainable.
Democrats in Congress have notably picked it up. Supporters of this gender-neutral language often say it's inclusive because some parents don't identify as women. But others oppose this concept of gender neutrality and say this could lead to bigger problems. For example, in Canada, they've taken gender and identity so seriously that you could be arrested for misgendering people. Take Robert Hoogland, a father reportedly jailed for referring to his 16-year-old biologically female child as his daughter, which the court prohibited. The teen identifies as male, and Hoogland was ordered to approve of her testosterone injections. Hoogland says the sexual and transgender identity education his daughter was exposed to in school is to blame for her wish to change sex. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
As the pushback against critical race theory continues, a mom who fled communist China has a warning for her local school board and America. She lays out the stark parallels between the ideology and cultural Marxism during China's Cultural Revolution. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
Up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar.
This Virginia mom fled communist China under Mao Zedong. And now she's warning Americans of the parallels between the Cultural Revolution and what's taking place in the United States. Earlier this week, she condemned her local school board for embracing critical race theory.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
Xi Van Fleet fled communist China when she was 26 years old. She said during the Cultural Revolution, she witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. School names were changed to be politically correct, and students were taught to denounce their heritage. She said Mao's Red Guards destroyed everything that was not communist, like old statues and books. Van Fleet said during the revolution, students were encouraged to report on each other and likened it to the school's Student Equity Ambassador program and bias reporting system. Van Fleet's one-minute speech not only won her a round of applause, it also went viral. And she joined Fox News host Sean Hannity on Thursday, further elaborating on the parallels. She said in China, they had their own version of wokeness.
Your level of wokeness determine your chance to get promotion or to get benefit. And who decides your level of wokeness? It is the party leaders.
And that in America, people get called a racist for not going along with the ideology of wokeness. In China, you were called a counter-revolutionary.
So it is a hat that fits all. And once the hat is on your head, your life is ruined. And the methodology is also very similar. It's cancel culture. We basically cancel the whole Chinese civilization pre-communism.
She has a message for Americans. Freedom is fragile, and we can lose it any time if we don't defend it. She said she expects more Chinese Americans will speak out to warn America about the direction the country's heading. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
The governors of Arizona and Texas are asking all other states to send available law enforcement to help out at the U.S.-Mexico border. This as Texas announces it is going to build its own border wall along the southern border. NTD's Allison Lee has the story.
I will announce next week the plan for the state of Texas to begin building the border wall in the state.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott announced Thursday a range of measures to deal with the border crisis, including a new task force. It will consist of the governor's office, the attorney general's office, the Department of Public Safety, and other agencies.
And they will meet every 2 weeks with the Texas Border Sheriff's Coalition, county judges, mayors, property rights organizations, concerned citizens, and prosecutors in border communities.
And the task force will do more than that. Abbott says it's wrong that Texas landowners have to suffer from damages caused by illegal aliens.
The federal government should pay for those damages. The governor's task force about the border will work with landowners to seek recovery from the federal government for the damages that were caused by the federal government.
Abbott is calling on other states to help Texas by sending in law enforcement officials, drones, and helicopters. He has a message to other states that the border crisis affects the entire country.
Arizona Governor Ducey and I are invoking an interstate compact power that empowers states to help one another in times of disaster and emergency. We're calling on other states to send reinforcements.
Also among the measures is a budget approval allocating $1 billion to deal with the crisis. Furthermore, Texas law enforcement will be arresting and detaining anyone who entered the country illegally and is caught trespassing. Abbott says his state will not sit idly by as the crisis grows. Allison Lee, NTD News.
For Americans living on the Texas-Mexico border, their lives have changed dramatically with the surge in migrants illegally crossing the border into their backyards. NTD's Kay Rubacek went to the border to follow the migrants' journey, the authorities who capture them, an economist who studies them, and a deputy sheriff who searches for the remains of those who don't survive the crossing.
That's not a knife. This is a knife. It's a Sunday morning, and since 6:30 a.m., Border Patrol have been hugely active. This bus is full of mostly young males. The women and the children were left behind, so we're going to see where they take them.
Migration links markets in ways that most people don't appreciate.
Oh my goodness me. I just had a light bulb go off in my head when you explained it that way, because it seems so complicated.
I feel like the luckiest guy in the world just about every day, honestly, that I have the job that I have.
We have 944 square miles. I'm looking for anybody that got left behind. It's my job to recover the bodies, bring them back.
I'm actually sitting on a body bag here.
Actually sitting on a body bag.
Yeah.
A country can't have an entire population within their borders and nobody knows anything about them.
The southern border of the US. Some say there's a crisis at the border. Some say illegal immigration is out of control. Others fear drug or human smuggling. Some say there's no problem at all. So what is happening at the border? We decided to go there and see it for ourselves.
Border Patrol brought more illegal immigrants to join this group and spent hours processing them, while other officers rushed to capture more.
The migrants that are coming over, by and large, up in the high 90%, they're not a threat, right? They're seeking economic opportunity either because they don't have an economic opportunity in their country or they have opportunities here that they've heard about through family and friends. So that trying to push back on the migrants really is creating more problems than it's solving.
This map shows all the hundreds of bodies Don has recovered all across Brooks County.
Just a few years ago, a coyote would carry over-the-counter speed drugs, caffeine pills, decongestants, things like that, and he would give them to the people to keep them going. The smart ones would do that. Now they don't. It just seems like they don't care. Keep up. No, you can't. Oh well, bye.
How do you define a coyote?
There are people that think it's a real coyote.
Like the animal?
The animal. There are people that really think that. It's mind-boggling. He's just somebody that knows where they want to go, and he guides them through. I've never known a first responder that didn't rely on black humor to survive, if you will. I mean, without that, if you internalize everything, you're a suicide statistic, basically.
You can watch the full episode of Life and Times tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And today, Congressman Chip Roy from Texas introduced a bill that would ban members of the Chinese Communist Party from owning land in the U.S. Roy says this bill would ensure Texas land will never come under the control of the CCP. In a statement, the congressman warns that the CCP's quest for global domination and their direct investment in the U.S. economy pose a major threat to Americans' way of life. Data shows that 30 million acres of U.S. farmland is owned and controlled by foreign investors. In Texas, a Chinese-based energy company bought more than 130,000 acres of land. Now that Chinese-owned company is working to build a wind farm to access the U.S. power grid. That's why Representative Roy is working to pass this bill to prohibit the CCP from purchasing public or private real estate in America. And Roy already has support from 3 other Republican Congress members. He's likely to gain more support soon, since Congress has been working in a bipartisan manner to push back against the CCP. Earlier this week, the Senate passed a bill to increase America's competitiveness with China. And the Department of Justice is doubling its voting rights staff. It's to combat what the AG calls voter restrictions. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more.
The Attorney General says enforcing federal voting laws is a critical and original mission of the Justice Department. So in the next 30 days, he's going to double the division's enforcement staff for protecting the right to vote.
As part of its mission to protect the right to vote, the Justice Department will, of course, do everything in its power to prevent election fraud.
At the same time, the Attorney General criticized 14 Republican states that recently passed measures meant to prevent election fraud.
We are scrutinizing new laws that seek to curb voter access. Particularly concerning in this regard are several studies showing that in some jurisdictions, non-white voters must wait in line substantially longer than white voters to cast their ballots.
But what the Attorney General didn't mention is that voting operations are handled at the local level. Georgia's gubernatorial candidate Vernon Jones says poor planning leads to long lines.
The majority of the governing authority there is African American, including the chief executive. The election supervisor is African American. The chairman of the elections board is African American. Now, is that African American suppressing the black vote? And if there are long lines, it's because of poor planning. That's a local issue.
Garland will also publish new guidance to clarify voting protections as jurisdictions draw up new maps. There's an upcoming redistricting cycle, which means some areas will gain seats in the House, while others will lose seats.
We're going to gain a seat here in North Carolina, and it's up to the legislature how they're going to figure out how to draw those maps. I'm just hoping for fair, legal maps.
During his remarks, Garland called on Congress to pass new Democrats' voter reform bills. One of them would require areas that are deemed to have a history of racial discrimination to get approval from the federal government before they can change their voting rules.
Which would provide the department with the tools it needs.
But passing the Democrat-backed voting bills is unlikely, since all Republicans oppose them and say they unnecessarily federalize voting. Moderate Democrat Senator Joe Manchin also spoke out against one of the bills this week, calling it a partisan law that will destroy the binds of democracy. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Remember that Baltimore plant where millions of doses of the J&J vaccine were contaminated? Well, reports say the FDA gave 10 million doses a pass, and they'll be released. Here's that story.
Reports say at least 170 million vaccine doses were put on hold after a batch was contaminated in late March at a Baltimore plant. That led to its closure. Now, months later, the FDA says it has given 2 batches a pass. 10 million doses, according to AP's anonymous sources. They'll be sent out for emergency use. But data from Kaiser Family Foundation says that Americans have the least confidence in the J&J vaccine safety. A problem some speculate is linked to the vaccine's pause after reports of blood clots and thrombocytopenia, a condition that can result in bleeding that's hard to stop. Plus, J&J's is the only vaccine that uses fetus cells in its production, which doesn't sit well with Christians and pro-life advocates. The Wall Street Journal reported that millions of unused J&J vaccines are set to expire this month. And overseas, the European Medicines Agency says they recommend against EU releasing vaccines from the Baltimore plant to be on the safe side. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
Washington, D.C. is open again. The city lifted all indoor capacity limits, and residents are getting back to life as they once remembered it.
And we anticipate on 3 weeks following that, on June 11th, that we will be able to all turn up activity in the district all the way.
On Friday, bars, nightclubs, and entertainment venues in Washington, D.C. resumed normal operations without any capacity limits. That includes venues with a capacity of 2,500 people. The Biden administration issued a guideline to federal government agencies Thursday, lifting the 25% occupancy limit at workplaces. More than 100,000 people work for the federal government in the district. Federal government employees moved swiftly from 3% teleworking in March 2020 to nearly 60%. All Smithsonian museums will reopen by the end of August. Timed entry passes are required at most locations. Visitors can reserve free passes online.
Coming up, ahead of the New York primaries, a group of parents are expressing their demands for candidates. They want to make sure things like the gifted and talented programs are not taken away. Many people have always enjoyed living near the ocean. One community takes this a step further by building their homes on top of the waters. That and more on NTD News. A parents' advocacy group is endorsing several candidates for New York City Council's upcoming primaries. They want to ensure certain academic programs, such as gifted and talented and the specialized high school admissions test, are not taken away. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Do not mess with our children's education.
Thank you.
You mess with them, I mess with you.
Parent leaders for Accelerated Curriculum and Education, or PLACE NYC, say a proper education for every child is key for a good society. But they say many parents are not happy with the changes made this year by the Department of Education, or DOE. Some families are even considering relocating so their children will get a quality education. Previously, middle school students would get accepted into specialized schools based on their grades, test scores, attendance, and other assessments. But the DOE recently changed that and moved to a lottery system for admission to specialized schools.
Stop playing politics with our kids' lives.
And high school students who live closer to a particular school used to have geographical priority to attend a high school closer to home. But this year, geographical priority has also been removed, forcing students to travel to other areas of the city to attend high school.
In Queens, about 16,000 high school students leave the borough every day to come to school in a different borough to get educated. It's not fair.
Also this year, the Panel for Education Policy removed the gifted and talented test for 4-year-olds. The admission process for that program will also be going to a lottery system.
We have angry parents, we have pissed off parents, we have parents that are thinking of making life choices out of the city. And if our next mayor, if our next city council are not going to make some serious changes, we're going to see a lot of families making personal choices for their children's future.
Many of the candidates who spoke today are not happy with the direction New York City public schools are headed. They encouraged everyone to get out and vote for candidates who will be stronger on education. Early voting starts on June 12th. Jason Perry, NTD News, New York.
A group in San Francisco is demanding names of priests that have credible accusations of child sex abuse. San Francisco's Archbishop has yet to release those names. NTD's Jason Blair has the story.
On Thursday, a press conference was held to call for San Francisco Archbishop Cordileone to release the list of clergy that have been credibly accused of child sex abuse. Attendees include abuse survivors, advocates, attorneys, and a whistleblower priest.
The people that need the most protection on this planet are children. They're innocent. That's why I'm here.
To call upon him to release the names so that the survivors of abuse, whose names he knows, can know that they're not alone and the only ones.
Cordileone is one of the 16 Catholic dioceses in the U.S. that has not published this information. For the past few years, abuse survivors and a group of attorneys have pressured Cordileone and other San Francisco Bay Area bishops to publicize the names. Jeff Anderson and Associates released a report in 2018 using publicly available information. Over 200 accused clergy in the San Francisco Bay Area were listed in the report. In response to the report in 2018, a spokesman for the Archdiocese of San Francisco expressed doubt. He said, "We can't tell how it was put together or from what sources or the criteria that were used." The Archdiocese of San Francisco was not immediately available for response to Thursday's press conference. Jason Blair, NTD News, San Francisco.
Can you imagine living in a house that floats? A close-knit community near San Francisco is doing just that, living in floating houses. NTD's Jason Blair has the story.
Over 400 homes reside on top of Richardson Bay waters near San Francisco. The Floating Homes Association say they've represented this unique community in over 5 marinas since 1985. The floating homes are known to have great views with the bay literally at your doorstep. Some homeowners have been enamored by the floating homes since youth. The real estate provides views of the scenic flora and fauna, as well as activities like paddle boating.
I've been obsessed with floating homes and houseboats for a long time. I find them so unique and so charming, and just the environment, everyone's so friendly.
They've lived in their floating home for over a year. They say the joys of being close to nature outweighs the inconveniences.
We have friends that have come out here and they just look at us like, you guys are crazy. Why would you, if you were going to buy a house, why would you buy this house?
Yeah.
It takes a certain type of person to live this lifestyle. No garbage space and having to walk across the dock to take out the trash. They say you have to be a social person.
Like when we first got here, we received gifts from our neighbors, like flowers and cookies. And I always tell people, this would never happen in the city. I've never received anything from my neighbors in San Francisco, so this is very unique.
The community normally provides an on-site tour of their rare housing lifestyle. This year they took their live tour online, showcasing several of the homes.
The barnwood floor was a big investment for me. I love this mix of kind of contemporary with old.
While owning a floating home isn't for everybody, this community has managed quite literally to stay afloat. Jason Blair, NTD News, San Francisco.
New York City's iconic Independence Day fireworks are coming back in full force. It'll highlight the hero within, showcasing American bravery and optimism. At around 9:45 p.m., the annual 45th fireworks are set to ignite. There will be 5 barges on the East River and Midtown Manhattan, and the show will launch more than 65,000 shells and effects. Mayor de Blasio says this will be the biggest show yet. There will be a section for vaccinated people and another section for unvaccinated people. It'll be broadcast on NBC on July 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern for those who can't come to New York. And it'll feature artists like Coldplay, Tori Kelly, and Reba McEntire. McDonald's, the latest company hit by a cyber attack. It's not a ransomware attack like Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods, it's data theft. And a viral video on Chinese social media captures a case of police brutality there. Chinese traffic police stopped a biker over a traffic violation and slapped him in the face. Find out more on NTD News.
Every once in a while, something comes along, so masterful, it leaves you in awe. So inspiring, it changes your life. So beautiful, you wish it would never end. When that happens, it's something not to be missed. Shen Yun, coming to the Palace Theater, June 26th and 27th. Tickets at shenyun.com/Stamford.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation hosted the annual ceremony today in Washington, D.C., honoring the more than 100 million victims who have been killed by communism and the 1.5 billion people who still live and suffer under communist regimes.
It was a rainy day in Washington, D.C., but dozens of senior diplomats from embassies around the world, including those of former communist countries such as Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, still joined the event. They laid wreaths in front of the Victims of Communism Memorial, paying tribute to the over 100 million victims of communism around the world.
This ceremony reminds us that the millions of men, women, and children who continue to lose their rights, their dignity, and too often their lives, we must remain vigilant and remain committed to a future free from the false hope of communism.
According to the Black Book of Communism, in the last century, the number of people killed by the Chinese Communist Party add up to at least 65 million, the highest in the world, and the atrocities are still going on today.
From the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre to forced organ harvesting to the current Uyghur genocide, the Chinese Communist Party has inflicted atrocity after atrocity upon its people, and in Hong Kong, on the mainland, and increasingly even abroad.
The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation presented this year's Truman Regan Medal of Freedom to Jimmy Lai, a Hong Kong entrepreneur and pro-democracy activist. He was recently sentenced to 14 months in prison due to his activism during the 2019 pro-democracy protests. His friend accepted the award on his behalf. The foundation is currently building a museum in Washington, D.C. Phase 1 of the project will be complete later this year, with the first exhibition to be titled Remember Us.
McDonald's is another company to suffer a data breach. It says hackers have stolen employee and customer information. NTD's Colin Frederickson has more.
McDonald's, the world's largest burger chain, is the latest to be hit by a data breach. Hackers stole customer and employee data from the U.S., South Korea, and Taiwan.
Apparently, they've been putting recent investments into strong cyber defense software, and that appears to have allowed them to spot the hackers enough that they were able to prevent accessing critical corporate data.
McDonald's told NTD only a small number of files were accessed, and based on their investigation, only Korea and Taiwan had customer personal data taken. It also told U.S. employees to watch out for phishing emails, a Trojan horse in email form.
It could be from a friend or a colleague asking for you to click a link. And what it often is, it's a malicious attacker trying to get into your system by masquerading as someone else.
It's too early for details about the hackers, but one expert speculates they could be attempting identity theft.
Criminals like to file for unemployment for people and try to see if they can get the government to send them checks. We see this often.
McDonald's says hackers stole some business contact information from U.S. employees and franchises, but that the data wasn't sensitive or personal. It told NTD it'll use the findings from its investigation to further enhance its security measures. Colin Frederickson, NTD News.
Chinese netizens are reacting strongly to a viral video. In it, a police assistant slapped a biker in his face and kicked him multiple times.
A video showing a police assistant beating a biker went viral on Chinese social media earlier this week. It took place in South China's Hainan province on Tuesday. A traffic police officer and 3 police assistants stopped a man on an electric bike and alleged that he violated traffic law. Police assistants in China are temporal employees. They assist formal police officers and also wear police uniforms. The video is triggering heated discussions online. The story's hashtag has attracted hundreds of millions of views on Chinese social media, Weibo. A netizen said, "We should make it fair. If attacking a police officer is a crime, then what is it if a policeman beats people? Maybe a law should be introduced." Amid the public outcry, the local Public Security Bureau responded the next day, saying that they had already fired the man from the Traffic Police Department and handed him over to local public security organs. But netizens seem to have doubts on whether the police assistant would really be prosecuted based on law. A netizen wrote, "He violated the law and was transferred to another department of the same bureau. The law doesn't prosecute him. What a great law." And this is not an isolated case in China. Another case of police brutality in Shanghai caused national outrage in 2017. A policeman threw a woman and her baby onto the ground after they argued over a parking ticket. Another viral video shows a compilation of police brutality in China. They can be rather common in the country, and the police officers are often unpunished. Usually, only when videos like these are posted online and there's a public outcry do the police officers get punished.
Something unusual is happening in China. 3 earthquakes within 2 hours in a single province. The strongest quake has a magnitude of 5.1. Curiously, the epicenter is close to where a herd of elephants are traveling through. NTD's Don Ma has more.
3 earthquakes hit southwestern China's Yunnan province within just 2 hours on Thursday. They damaged over 2,500 households. The strongest earthquake registered 5.1 on the Richter scale, and residents could feel the shaking lasting around 5 to 6 seconds. It's considered a medium-level earthquake on the scale. Authorities reported that it hit at around 8 p.m. local time in a county in central Yunnan. About 10 minutes later, another earthquake hit the same county. This time, it was relatively minor, a magnitude of 3.6. One more earthquake struck the county about an hour later. It was also a minor one, with a magnitude of 3.3. Footage circulating online shows objects shaking inside people's homes. The epicenter of the earthquake is about 10 miles from a herd of 15 elephants traveling through the province. The elephants were not affected by the earthquake. But the herd of 15 is now only 14. Chinese state media reported that one elephant has strayed from the group recently. The elephants trekked over 300 miles from a city in southern Yunnan, and as of Friday, they passed a major city in central Yunnan. There is still no consensus on why the elephants embarked on the trek, but one theory is that they're looking for areas with more abundant food supplies. Don Ma, NTD News.
Coming up, a digital health pass in Europe can track if people came into contact with someone who's been diagnosed with the CCP virus. But many are concerned with the issue of privacy. And a replica of the Statue of Liberty begins its journey from France to the United States. The gift showcases the historic friendship between the two nations. We'll tell you more in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm gonna pass the savings directly on to you. For example, you get my 6-piece towel sets, regular $109.99, now only $44.98, or MyPillow dog beds for as low as $19.99 with your promo code.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit mypillow.com.
President Joe Biden is on his first foreign trip since taking office. In his first stop, he met with members of the G7 in a British coastal town. NTD's Steve Lance brings us the story.
This year's G7 summit is hosted by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and it kicked off in the British coastal county of Cornwall. Queen Elizabeth hosted a reception for the group who was there for the 3-day event. After a year of isolation from the pandemic, the face-to-face meeting was held in person.
It is genuinely wonderful to see everybody in person. I can't tell you what a difference it makes. We've all been going through the most wretched pandemic our countries have faced for our lifetimes, maybe longer.
The G7 countries are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the United States. And alongside these countries, the President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission of the EU are participating in all discussions as guests. A large part of the discussions will revolve around how to overcome the pandemic and how to deal with the threat from China. Before the G7 meetings officially started, President Biden made an announcement in the UK with the CEO of Pfizer.
In my direction, the United States will purchase an additional 500 million doses from Pfizer vaccine, that will donate nearly 100 low and lower middle income countries. They will be the beneficiaries.
This announcement comes as many Latin American countries have been purchasing Russian and Chinese vaccines to keep up with the demand. Biden also said the move was to mobilize further commitments from the world's democracies, including those from within the G7. In a joint statement, Biden and Johnson vowed to further investigate the origins of the CCP virus. As the world is starting to see how the CCP may be the master of the cover-up and just how difficult it is to get accurate information out of the communist country, it is starting to give rise to other questions, such as the ongoing persecution and crimes against humanity against Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghur Muslims. And if those crimes are just the tip of the iceberg, what is the United States and the rest of the world going to do about it? Steve Lance, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Biden has reversed another Trump-era move. On Thursday, his administration repealed some Iran sanctions on officials and countries in the country's national oil company. NTD's Kevin Hogan brings us more.
Middle-income families. Biden's Treasury Department repealed Trump-era counterterrorism sanctions on 3 officials who were formerly in Iran's state-owned oil company. The administration said it's routine business to remove these officials from the blacklist. That's because they are no longer holding positions in the sanctioned company. A week before the 2020 election, Trump sanctioned Iranian officials involved in petrochemical processing, saying this sector finances Iran's Quds Force. In April 2019, the U.S. designated Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Trump left the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, but Biden has indicated he wants to rejoin. State Secretary Blinken said it's unclear if Iran wants to come back into compliance.
Were that to happen, our responsibility would be to lift sanctions inconsistent with the JCPOA, but to resolutely maintain sanctions that are consistent with it to deal with the multiplicity of Iran's malign actions.
Talks in Vienna were aimed at bringing the U.S. back into the nuclear deal. Officials familiar with the situation spoke to the Wall Street Journal and said Biden was looking into ways to inject momentum into the negotiations. But State Department spokesman Ned Price said there is absolutely no connection between lifting the sanctions and the talks in Vienna. The Iran nuclear deal was meant to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but the 2015 deal has been criticized because it would allow the Iranian regime to use centrifuges by 2025 and have no limits on its uranium enrichment by 2030. Biden's move diverges from Trump's harsh sanctions on Iran and attempts to isolate the country within the region, and moves closer towards Obama-era appeasement of the Iranian regime.
In Europe, a health pass and a phone app can notify users if someone they came into contact with has been diagnosed with COVID, with the aim of preventing more cases. But it also means people are being tracked. NTD correspondent David Vives met with a policy analyst to look at the possible implications of this.
For about a year, contact tracing technologies have been used in Europe to help slow the spread of the CCP virus, also known as novel coronavirus. While it allows people who've activated the application to know if they have been in contact with COVID cases, it also keeps track of people's movement. And the data collected is shared between countries. Another measure supporting this contact tracing system, the Health Pass, which allows people to travel within Europe. Political analyst Eric Verag says in Europe, the app and pass reinforce each other's population tracking.
The Health Pass is a part of a strategy to track people from the European Union. Its objective is to get people used to being tracked. On April 29th, French President Emmanuel Macron implemented the health pass in France, saying it was his idea. By the end of May, the EU Commission suggested the sanitary pass should be implemented in European countries. We then understood this was one of the measures discussed by government leaders within the European Council.
The NIH cites a study by Oxford University that says around a quarter of people in the UK use the app on a regular basis. In France, the COVID app has been activated by 20 million users, according to government figures. As lockdown measures ease in France, the Health Pass, which works together with the application, will be mandatory to attend to certain places or venues. But this is raising concern about protecting people's privacy and personal rights. RAAB says this is a part of the Great Reset agenda, a program written by Davos Forum leader Klaus Schwab and economist Thierry Malray, which suggests tracing populations internationally, and it mirrors the surveillance system of the Chinese Communist Party.
Schwab and Mallory say there are tracing and tracking technologies. In China, people are being identified and stalked as soon as they go out in the street. This is tracking. Whereas tracing, as in Europe, means once people go out on the street, we want to be able to identify people they are in contact with, where they go, etc.
According to official sources in the UK and France, the more people use the app, the better it will work in preventing people from getting the virus. In France, no study so far has confirmed this. A UK study shows about 6% of those notified went on to get tested for COVID, a number in keeping with traditional contact tracing methods. David Gives, NTD News, Paris.
Plans for players to kneel at the Euro 2020 Football Championship have drawn controversy. While some see it as showing support for minority players, others say it's politicizing the sport.
A recent poll says a minority of English, Welsh and Scottish fans think taking a knee at football matches is important, and about half are in support of the gesture. It was popularized by former American football quarterback Colin Kaepernick and has been often displayed at the Black Lives Matter protests. And kneeling began at football games from the middle of last year. But some fans say it has lost its relevance and sport should not be politicized. Some fans booed when England's team took a knee ahead of some recent games, including an international friendly against Romania on Sunday. England manager Gareth Southgate says he is expecting more boos at the upcoming Euro 2020 games.
It's certainly not going to stop my support for our players and our staff. So that's it. We're going to have to live with that.
Southgate says he and his players will continue to take a knee. One Conservative MP says he's boycotting England's games because of the kneeling. And another Tory MP has applauded Scotland's footballers' move not to take the knee before their matches. Although Scotland announced on Friday they will kneel against ignorance at the match against England at Wembley. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban on Thursday defended the football fans who booed the Irish team kneeling at a game this week.
In the Hungarian cultural context, such a gesture is allowed or even expected only in 3 cases. A Hungarian man only kneels before God, before his country, and when he asks for the hand of his lover. That is the 3rd case. In all other cases, this gesture is quite simply culturally alien in Hungary.
The Hungarian Football Federation released a statement saying the national team would not kneel. Hungary is one of the Euro 2020 hosts.
UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there's no doubt some countries are using vaccines as a diplomatic tool, but Britain does not support the so-called vaccine diplomacy.
At the G7 summit, Western leaders are discussing how to overcome the devastation caused by the CCP virus pandemic. Diplomats fear that Russia and China are using their vaccines to gain influence across the world, especially in poorer countries. Talking to the media on the summit sidelines, Dominic Raab said he had no doubt this was going on and that Britain does not support vaccine diplomacy.
There's no doubt there's some of this going about, and we don't support vaccine diplomacy, let alone blackmail. We think that we've got a moral duty, but also strong vested interest in getting the world vaccinated, because we know no one's safe until we're all safe.
RAAB also said G7 leaders need to make it clear to Russia and China that they must abide by the rules and values of the international community.
I think standing up for the international order, being clear about the rules that apply, being clear about the values that apply, and being clear to both Russia and China as leading members of the international community, they must live up to their responsibilities. That's a pretty important message to come out of this G7.
The Foreign Secretary criticised Russia for its role in a string of cyber attacks against Western institutions, including hospitals. He called for the G7 to take a united stand against all such behaviour.
A scaled-down replica of the Statue of Liberty is on its way to the U.S. from France. Riding on the back of a flatbed truck, it will retrace the larger monument's journey made over a century ago. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
The replica, which stands just over 9 feet tall, is being loaned to the United States for 10 years to cement the nation's friendship with France.
We wanted to hold this within tight timings. Today is the day after June 6th, the day after D-Day. We are also targeting July 4th, which is Independence Day, and on July 14th, the statue will be presented. So yes, French-American friendship should be marked under the symbol of liberty.
On Monday, workers used a crane to gently lift the statue off its pedestal in Paris. They then laid it on the back of a truck, covered with plastic film for protection and padded with foam blocks.
I think the Statue of Liberty is precious to all Americans, and to me particularly as the child of immigrants and a child of New York, having grown up seeing her face as part of the welcome to all that come to the United States and the hope, the chance, the opportunity for a new life.
France gave the larger version of the Statue of Liberty to the U.S. as a gift. It was completed and assembled in 1886. Frederick August Bartholdi designed the smaller replica in 1878.
First, I think that Bartholdi would have been extremely surprised by the popularity of his piece. 4 million visitors yearly in New York. It's an incredible success. It's probably one of the key monuments that we have in our minds, and I think he would have been happy.
Bartholdi also created New York's larger version, with help from engineer Gustave Eiffel, the man behind Paris's Eiffel Tower. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
After being closed for 1.5 years, New York City's legendary Carnegie Hall will resume performances in October. The announcement changed everyone's thinking overnight, and they're now preparing to open sooner than expected. But at first, there will only be a limited schedule of recitals and small ensembles. The full-sized orchestras will return in January. The opening concert will most likely be live and in person, since Broadway theaters will be allowed to reopen at full capacity in September. Carnegie has been closed since March 2020, and the pandemic caused over $7 million in losses. As a result, the hall slightly reduced its schedules as far out as 2024. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.